Need help finishing a wide chainmail piece? I'm going to give you some tips right now. A lot of folks wonder about the best way to finish off a wide chainmail piece. I mean, you don't want to have a wide cuff and then this little tiny dinky lobster claw on it, right? So with that in mind, I'm going to show you some of Blue Buddha's favorite ways of finishing wide chainmail pieces. First, let's look at the different types of clasps you can use. My personal favorite is the slide clasp. You can also use a large toggle or the D-ring toggle. These aren't the only components you can use, but they are the ones that B3 uses over and over again. When using a slide clasp, you want one that's about the width of your piece. It's okay if it's a tad smaller or a little bit larger, but overall you don't really want much of a discrepancy between the length of the clasp and the width of your piece. This piece naturally has 3 end points, so there's 2 large rings on the end and 1 smaller ring in the center. The clasp, however, has 4 connection points. Don't let that discourage you. You can easily connect a 4 connection clasp to a 3 connection piece by doubling up one of the connection points like I did right here in the center. This piece is almost the same as the last. The concept is the same. There are 1, 2, 3 connection points leading to a 4 connection slide clasp. One thing to note here technique-wise is that these last 2 brown rings are a smaller ring size than they normally would be in the rest of the weave. Sometimes I do this at the end of my pieces to taper the weave down so there isn't as much negative space at the end. It also will pull the clasp closer to the weave so there's less interruption. When connecting to this clasp, I've used slightly larger rings on the outer connection points, tinier rings in the center, because these rings don't have as much distance to traverse. These are a little bit further, and so in order to keep things as straight as possible, when there's more distance to traverse, I use a larger ring. As I mentioned, this is a really complicated weave to finish. There is no one right way or wrong way to do it. I suggest just playing around with a few different ring sizes toward the end to see what aesthetically appeals to you the most. In finishing this piece, I've taken 3 adjacent columns of European 4-in-1, brought them to a point, and then connected to the clasp. I leave the next column alone, and then the next 3 also come to a point and connect to the clasp, and so on all the way through my piece. So when working on something at this scale, you just want to make sure that mathematically you have enough columns so that you'll be able to have even connection points where you need on your slide clasp. When choosing a toggle, you also want the toggle to be about the width of your piece. In some cases, you can even use a larger toggle if it's a really pretty design and you want it to be a focal point. At the end of this piece, I decided to use a slightly smaller ring to taper the weave. So just by using the smaller ring, it creates less negative space and it makes for a smoother transition between the weave leading to your toggle. At the end of this piece, I also tapered by using slightly smaller green rings than I would have used for the rest of the weave. And this little tiny ring here is also a taper because it's a much smaller version of this large ring. I only needed 1 ring to connect to the toggle because of the orientation of the hole. Depending on that orientation of the hole, you might need 2 rings because you don't want the toggle to sit perpendicular to the weave. With this piece, I wanted the weave to continue as close to the toggle as possible. So I did an interesting trick of essentially a reverse taper. So flipping it over to the underside of the weave, you can see that instead of bringing the weave to a point, I've brought it to a reverse point. The ends are higher up and closer to the toggle. And then I just used 1 ring to connect this center row. And so the effect is, when viewed from the front, it seems like the weave continues even underneath the toggle. The D-clasp is a great way to finish off necklaces and some bracelets. It attaches just like a slide clasp, but it functions like a toggle because you add the bar part to one end and then it's pulled through the other end. I hope you learned some techniques for finishing wide pieces. To see more examples, check out our page on Facebook and upload your own photo with your suggestions for finishing. Till next time, happy weaving!